still dry, modern, and unsinged by volcanic ash. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's gently roast history, all while lulling you into your weirdest, most educational nap yet. Let's set the scene. Your first mistake, you thought this would be relaxing. You, dear modern human, are woefully unprepared. First, you hand over your clothes to a sweaty teenager named Atticus, who for legal reasons will call a cloakroom attendant, and not someone who's definitely going to rifle through your pockets. If you're lucky, your sandals might still be there when you return. If not, congratulations, you're now barefoot and broke. A very Roman rite of passage. Now begins your transformation. You enter the apoditerium, the changing room. Imagine a locker room without lockers, or privacy, or any concept of personal space. Old men argue about horoscopes. A boy is crying because someone stole his strigil. Someone else is brushing olive oil into their armpits like it's conditioner. You're standing there awkwardly clutching a borrowed towel, already sweating, and not from the heat. Next up, the tepidarium, or warm room. Sounds soothing, right? A gentle prelude to the bath? Wrong. It's a human greenhouse, and you are the wilted lettuce. The walls sweat. The benches sweat. That one senator reciting Virgil? Also sweating. It's a calm kind of chaos, like a yoga class, if everyone was dehydrated, slightly dizzy, and politically charged. And then, the caldarium, the hot room. This is the Roman version of turn the heat up until the soul leaves the body. You walk into what feels like a giant stone pressure cooker. The air burns your nose hairs. Someone next to you is massaging themselves with a jar of mystery goo. You want to sit down, but every surface sizzles like a grill at rush hour. If you listen closely, you can hear your dignity evaporating. And here comes the star of the show, the strigil, the curved metal blade used to scrape the oil, sweat and sins off your body. Forget soap. Romans didn't believe in bubbles. They believed in abrasion. If you're lucky, a servant will do it for you. If you're not, you'll be shaving skin off your shins like Parmesan on a Caesar salad. Scrape, wipe, repeat, try not to cry. Now, you might be wondering, why? Why did millions of Romans, from emperors to fishmongers, endure this strange, sensual, sandblasting ritual nearly every day? Here's the thing. The bathhouse wasn't really about cleanliness. It was about being seen, heard, loafing publicly, with purpose. In a city where apartments were flammable and toilets doubled as social experiments, the thermae was one of the few spaces that felt controlled, ritualistic, warm, in more ways than one. It was a stage, and everyone was acting like they weren't absolutely dying of heat stroke. You couldn't just show up, scrub, and bounce. No. Bathing was a 4-act play. You started with exercise at the palestra, more on that circus later, then into the hot rooms to melt. Then you'd oil up and scrape down, and finally, you'd plunge into the frigid area. But that's another chapter. For now, you're still roasting like a festive goose, trying to remember whether eye contact is allowed in this room, or if you've just accidentally proposed marriage to a retired general. The layout itself was stunning. Colossal domed ceilings, sunlight filtering through oculus windows, mosaics beneath your feet, tiny tiles depicting sea gods and dolphins that felt wildly inappropriate given the smell of warm armpit in the air. Statues lined the walls, marble-bodied perfection staring silently as you fumble to keep your towel from slipping. And the noise. Constant. Laughter, debate, sneezing, slapping, oil jars clinking. Someone dropping a philosophical truth bomb about stoicism between grunts. You thought you'd find peace in the past? Think again. But here's the kicker. You had to be here. Bathing wasn't optional. Not if you wanted to stay socially relevant. If you skipped the baths, people noticed. They whispered. They assumed you were sick. Or worse, barbaric. Cleanliness was next to godliness. Sure. But in Rome it was also next to the juice vendor, and the guy selling roasted chickpeas in the atrium. This brings us to our old frenemy, social anxiety. Because nothing says relaxation like being surrounded by powerful judgmental acquaintances, while naked, sweaty and covered in oil. Every movement was a performance. Every conversation had stakes. If you slipped on a tile, someone would mention it at dinner. If you said something stupid in the steam room, it might end up in a poem. And if you forgot to tip the oil boy, well, may the gods help your reputation. Let's take a moment. Breathe that in, dust and all. You're not just in a bathhouse. You're in a Roman microcosm. Every corner represents a different layer of society: ambition, ego, hygiene, spectacle, and somewhere amid all the noise and nudity was a kind of strange harmony, a world where senators and slaves sometimes stood side by side, equal, if only for a moment, under the relentless weight of steam. And when the sun started to dip, and the oil cooled on your skin, and you shuffled back out into the chaotic Roman streets, slightly pronier but somehow lighter, that's when you understood. Not the point of bathing, that still made no sense, but the point of pausing, of boiling down the chaos of daily life into a slow, sweaty ritual, of scraping off the day's grime, literal and metaphorical, and emerging, however temporarily, reborn. Just don't think about where that strigil's been. You're finally cooling off. After surviving the human rotisserie that is the coldarium, you step into the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool, the kind of cold that makes your ancestors shiver, the kind of cold that causes time to momentarily pause while your lungs forget how to function. Welcome to ancient Rome's idea of refreshment, an unheated pool designed to shock the soul back into the body. If the coldarium was a philosophical death, the frigidarium is your reluctant resurrection, complete with shriveled pride and blue-tinted resolve. But don't get too relaxed. This isn't just for cooling down. Oh no, this is where things happen. The frigidarium wasn't just cold, it was hot. Socially, that is. If the steamy rooms were for quiet suffering and mild heat stroke, this was where Romans turned the dial to small talk with consequences. Beneath the surface of that icy pool bubbled flirtation, gossip, political scheming, and more than a few poorly timed cannonballs. Because yes, people jumped in. And yes, someone always got splashed. And yes, someone always pretended not to mind, then plotted social revenge over dinner. The room itself was designed for awe. High, vaulted ceilings, columns in symmetrical rows, light spilling through narrow windows, bouncing off the still, glassy water like something out of a Renaissance painting, except a few centuries early, and with more chest hair. The acoustics were brilliant, echoing your awkward splashes for all to hear. No pressure. And of course you're not alone. You're surrounded by Rome's best and worst in various states of undress. An aspiring playwright monologues while submerged to the neck. Two noble women whisper about their third cousin's scandalous affair with a lute player. A retired soldier loudly debates tax reform with a man who just sneezed into the water. Public spaces, private matters. This is Rome's Tinder, and you've just been super liked by a man with a unibrow and political ambitions. See, in the absence of apps, the Romans relied on presence. Eye contact, casual bumping of shoulders, a shared towel, perhaps, or a foot gently brushing yours under the water. Was that deliberate? You'll never know, because subtlety was an art form, and the stakes were surprisingly high. In fact, a great deal of Roman courting happened right here, in full view of judgmental peers and the occasional statue of Apollo looking vaguely amused. Wives bathed, husbands bathed, lovers bathed, mistresses bathed while pretending they weren't. Everyone acted like they weren't watching each other, while watching each other. And when things got steamy, emotionally, not thermally, sometimes they'd move the conversation to a private alcove, or more likely, not so private. Ancient marble didn't believe in modesty, and if your crush didn't return the gaze, tough luck. They'd probably talk about you in the next room, with hand gestures, loudly. Let's not forget the accessories. Jewelry glinting in candlelight, carefully tied hair, maybe a touch of perfume for the daring. You didn't just attend the baths. You performed. And while nudity was technically the uniform, style still mattered. Think less naked and afraid, more naked and trying to impress your ex. Now, as you desperately try to remember how to float without looking like a drowning carp, someone mentions coin-operated lockers. Yes, the Romans had them. Bendigus loculi, tiny wooden compartments where you'd leave your sandals, tunic and self-respect. They even came with keys, sometimes worn around the neck, stylish and practical. Just try not to lose yours in the plunge pool, like that poor baker's apprentice last week. He had to walk home in nothing but shame and goosebumps. And speaking of public embarrassment, slipping. Every bathhouse had that guy. The one who sprinted too confidently across a wet mosaic floor and paid the price. One minute he's strutting, the next he's horizontal, and questioning his life choices. The sound echoes. People politely pretend not to laugh for 5 seconds, then they absolutely laugh. Rome was cruel like that. Now pause. Let this picture settle. The stone, the stillness, a moment of chilly clarity. Because for all the absurdity, there's something eerily modern about this whole scenario. A public pool as a social stage, eye contact as a currency, even the way people position themselves, subtly drifting closer to someone interesting, away from someone annoying, always aware of who's watching whom. It's all familiar. Only instead of swiping, you're shivering. So here you are, sitting waist deep in ancient chlorinated mystery, contemplating your next move. Do you strike up conversation with that merchant from Hispania? Compliment that senator's tattoo? Yes, they had tattoos. Deal with it. Or do you play it cool, arms stretched along the edge, pretending you're deeply philosophical, and not just trying to distract from your prune fingers? The social rules were unspoken but ironclad. Don't splash. Don't stare too long. Don't comment on someone's body, unless you're absolutely sure it's a compliment, and they outrank you. And whatever you do, don't mention last week's political scandal, unless you want to start a debate that ends with someone slipping and falling on their moral high ground. But every so often, something magical happened. A quiet moment. 2 strangers meet eyes. A conversation begins. Genuine connection amid the absurdity. A laugh, a shared joke, maybe even a date, or what passed for a date in 2nd century Rome. A stroll through the garden atrium, followed by a fig pastry and a spirited argument about Aristotle. Love bloomed here. So did betrayal. More than one affair began between the columns of a frigidarium, and more than one marriage ended in a silent standoff across the plunge pool. Because even in antiquity, people were messy, dramatic, and terrible at subtlety. And that's what makes this space so human. It wasn't just water, it was a mirror, reflecting vanity, ambition, curiosity, the full, chilly spectrum of Roman society. From emperors to ex-cons, everyone dipped their toes into this bizarre ecosystem of etiquette, performance, and longing. So the next time someone tells you history is boring, remind them that 2,000 years ago people were practically speed dating in their underwear, in an ice bath, with no filter, no privacy, and a flute player in the corner playing backup. He now pretends it never happened. But everyone still calls him Lucius Splacius. Let's talk about heat. Not emotional warmth, not metaphorical heat. No, we're talking literal, toe-blistering, eyebrow-singeing fire. Because, you see, the Romans, brilliant, beautiful, slightly unhinged Romans, decided the best way to warm their sprawling, echoing, damp communal bathhouses was to light an actual inferno underneath them. Here's how it worked. Picture a basement, or more accurately, a hollow void beneath your feet, filled with columns of bricks. These little pillars held up the floor of the hot rooms. The heat would rise through the floor and snake up through flues built into the walls, turning the entire room into a giant human oven. Efficient? Absolutely. Safe? Oh, sweet naivete. Spoiler. Sometimes it did. Overheated floors cracked. Steam rooms caught fire. Entire bathhouses combusted, because the Romans apparently looked at a structure filled with wood, oil, smoke, fabric, and sweaty human beings, and thought, you know what this needs? Flames. And don't think you were immune either. A poorly timed step on a tile that got a little too hot. That was your skin, now fused with Roman concrete. Ever try to maintain a casual conversation about Cicero while your heels are melting? Not ideal. Of course, Romans being Romans, they adapted. They shuffled, danced, tiptoed across burning tiles, like elegant penguins avoiding emotional commitment. The trick was to keep moving. Never stop. Never sit too long. The moment you did, that's when the floor reminded you it was basically a frying pan with ambition. And while you were performing this delicate ballet of pain, you might notice something strange. Smoke. Not the nice incense kind. Not aromatic myrrh wafting gently through the air. No, this was acrid, eye-watering smoke from the furnace below, creeping up the flue like an uninvited dinner guest. Sometimes it leaked. Sometimes it exploded. There are records, real ones, of bathhouses suffocating their patrons mid-soak when the heating system failed, and smoke filled the room faster than anyone could find their sandals. Now let's talk about the people keeping all this madness operational. the enslaved laborers. The bathhouse wasn't a self-cleaning, auto-heating, magically functioning monument. Behind every steamy room was a team of invisible workers, men, women and children, who fed fires, cleaned out ash, drained scum-filled pools, and occasionally got trapped in the mechanical underbelly of Rome's leisure machine. Their sweat made your sweat possible, their burns ensured your comfort, and they never got to use the baths themselves. So yeah, let that sink in. Or boil in. Every glorious statue, every perfectly warm stone bench, every gentle cascade of hot water was powered by someone you never saw and never thanked. The hypercaust was a marvel, but it came with a cost, not measured in denarii, but in lives singed at the altar of Roman vanity. Now, zoom out. The coldarium above is humming. Heat rises in waves. Mosaics shimmer. Patrons discuss philosophy as if they're not currently sitting inches above a literal death trap. The illusion of luxury, maintained by constant, invisible labor. Modern spas with their softly lit Himalayan salt lamps and lukewarm eucalyptus towels don't even come close. And still, despite the danger, despite the drama, it worked. For centuries, this heating system wasn't a party trick. It was deployed across the empire, from Britain's damp fields to the North African coast. Hypercourts fueled not just baths but villas, public buildings, even brothels. Imagine Roman engineers with measuring rods, calculating angles and airflow, obsessed with delivering the perfect to 1-ton-degree sweat lodge without accidentally immolating the client. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they very much didn't. There's a particularly grim record of a thermae collapsing in a small Roman town. No battle, no earthquake, just fire plus poor maintenance. The result? Half the clientele cooked mid-conversation. The town held a funeral. Some even swore they smelled roasted pork for days, a detail you now can't unhear. You're welcome. And yet, Romans didn't stop bathing, or redesign the system, or add a smoke detector, because this was the price of being Roman. Risk, spectacle, comfort, at any cost. Even if that cost was occasionally your eyebrows. But maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point. That even surrounded by fire and mortality and second-degree burns, Romans still sought beauty. They still showed up. They still bathed. Because to them, civilization wasn't just surviving. It was steaming, toasting, exfoliating, elevating suffering into performance. Every bead of sweat, every scorched foot, was a declaration. We are refined, we are advanced, we are overheated. So next time your modern spa sauna doesn't hit the right temperature, remember, at least your floor isn't literally on fire, unless you live dangerously. In which case, call it a Roman experience. Cleanliness. That thing your modern brain equates with lavender-scented body wash, foaming gels, and a loofah that looks like a fabric sea urchin. But if you brought that hygiene ritual into ancient Rome, the locals would stare at you like you'd just performed witchcraft. Because soap wasn't a thing. Not for the Romans, anyway. Instead, they had oil. Olive oil, to be precise. Nature's answer to everything, from salad dressing to skincare. But here's the kicker. The Romans didn't rinse with it. They rubbed it on, liberally, like an oily second skin, and then they scraped it off using a curved piece of metal called a strigil. Imagine taking a butter knife to your glistening body and peeling away the day's filth like you're an overripe peach. Charming, isn't it? And it wasn't a solo experience. Oh no. Enter the uncles, bath house attendants, who, for a modest fee, would slather you up and scrape you down, a stranger oiling your thighs in public, while an old man hums nearby and a boy sells honeyed dates from a tray. That was Tuesday. Now, let's get something straight. This wasn't luxurious in the spa day sense. It was efficient, maybe even therapeutic, but not what you'd call clean, because the oil mixed with your sweat, your dust, your regrets, and whatever you'd picked up from sitting on a communal stone bench moments earlier. Then that stew of skin goo was scraped into a bowl, and brace yourself, sometimes reused, not always for bathing. No, in the most delightful twist of fate, some enterprising Romans decided to sell the used oil mixture to apothecaries. They claimed it had healing properties. It was marketed as a rejuvenating skin cream. Picture a bottle labeled, now with authentic gladiator grime. So yes, Somewhere in ancient Rome, a wealthy woman may have dabbed a mystery ointment onto her face that once dripped down a centurion's lower back. Breathe that in, slowly, deeply. Let the horror exfoliate your soul. Let's rewind. You've just emerged from the caldarium, your skin already begging for mercy. A servant hands you a warm flask of oil. You rub it in, because you're trying to fit in. You tell yourself, it's moisturizing, as your pores weep in confusion. Then comes the strigil, cold, slightly bent, and probably not cleaned since Emperor Tiberius was in office. You scrape, and scrape. Now, unless you were rich, you'd do this to yourself. But if you had coin to spare, a muscle-bound attendant might do it for you. The upside? You didn't have to contort. The downside, you had to trust that he wasn't distracted by a philosophical debate in the next room and about to slice your elbow open. Also, and this is key, oil didn't rinse off in water. It clung. It left a sheen. Roman baths were less about washing away and more about redistributing the grime in a socially acceptable pattern. You left gleaming. Yes, but not exactly fresh. More like a well-basted roast. Let's meet Gaius. Gaius is a fictional mid-level bureaucrat. His job involves copying documents, arguing over tax rates, and pretending to enjoy poetry. Gaius has had a rough day. His sandal broke. His neighbour's goat escaped. Again, he decides to treat himself to a visit to the therma. He walks in, nods at the regulars, and proceeds to immediately embarrass himself by trying to talk politics in the caldarium. Amateur move. Baths were for banter, yes, but not serious debates. Philosophy was acceptable. Flirtation? Encouraged. Discussion of grain tariffs, social suicide. Already red-faced, both from the heat and shame, Gaius attempts to recover in the oiling area. He chooses a strigil from the communal pile, possibly clean, possibly cursed, and begins his ritual. As he scrapes the mixture into a small bronze container, he catches the eye of a woman across the room. She sneezes. He panics. Was that interest? Disgust? A medical emergency? He flees to the frigidarium, slipping on someone's discarded sandal, and emerges hours later slick, sore, and spiritually confused. Classic Gaius. What's fascinating here isn't just the weirdness, it's the intention. The ritual, the way Romans approached bathing not as hygiene, but as a kind of social grooming. The oiling wasn't a prelude to cleanliness, it was the main event. Because for them, cleanliness wasn't about sterility, it was about presentation. You glowed. You radiated health and wealth. You smelled vaguely like olive trees and desperation, but you looked good doing it. And beneath it all, the Romans genuinely believed oil had therapeutic properties. It soothed aches, protected the skin, acted as a sunblock, sort of. Athletes would slather it on before wrestling. Philosophers applied it before long walks. Even children were rubbed down with oil. Not just for health, but because nobody wanted to be known as the parent of a flaky child. And yet, for all their obsession with bodily maintenance, the Romans completely ignored bacteria. Germ theory wouldn't exist for another 17 centuries, so while you're busy moisturizing with communal oil, remember, so is everyone else, including that one guy with the mysterious back rash, who insists it's just from the dust. But there's a strange peace in the chaos, something about surrendering to the weirdness, accepting that your cleanliness is subjective, that your beauty routine involves being rubbed down in public by a semi-literate man named Lucullus, who insists on quoting Ovid while applying oil to your kneecaps. So yes, no soap, no bubbles, no peppermint-scented artisanal scrubs, just oil, metal, skin, and spectacle. It was communal, intimate, ridiculous, and somehow deeply human. You've just walked into the palastra, the Roman gymnasium attached to the bathhouse. And no, this isn't your friendly neighborhood fitness center with spa music and a smoothie bar. It's more like a gladiator boot camp, a wrestling mat, a CrossFit box, and a testosterone-scented coliseum, all rolled into one, with slightly fewer clothes. Welcome to the prelude to your bath, voluntary dehydration. The palastra wasn't an optional detour. It was where many bathgoers began their experience, especially the macho ones. You'd come here to lift rocks, punch bags of sand, jog in circles until your knees gave out, and show off your biceps to anyone within 30 feet. You didn't just come to get clean, you came to earn your bath through sweat, grunting, and the ancient Roman version of gym bro culture. And it wasn't just for athletes. Everyone from retired centurions to teenage aristocrats showed up here, trying to maintain a figure that screamed, "I could conquer Gaul, but also appreciate marble sculpture." But let's focus on the athletes, the real ones. Wrestlers, boxers, javelin throwers, greased head to toe in olive oil, looking like someone dumped them out of a salad bowl. These weren't just people who enjoyed sport. These were semi-mythological figures in training, building their bodies into monuments of strength, ego, and elbow grease. Then you had the gladiators. Now, technically, gladiators weren't considered respectable citizens. They were usually enslaved, criminals, or prisoners of war. But they were celebrities too, tabloid icons, before tabloids existed, and they definitely used the baths. Imagine this. You, a mild-mannered shopkeeper, sitting in the tepidarium, trying not to pass out from the heat, and next to you, a famous retiarius, net-wielding gladiator, with a missing ear, 3 battle scars, and a fan base larger than most poets. He's humming. You're pretending not to look. Everyone is deeply aware of his thigh muscles. The atmosphere? Electric, tense. A mix of admiration, fear, and overwhelming body odor. Bathhouses, in theory, were egalitarian. You could be a slave or a senator. In the steam room, everyone sweat the same. But that's only partially true. Because even in the most democratic of bathhouses, the hierarchy whispered through every interaction. Who entered first? Who got the freshest oil? Who got towel service from the prettiest attendant? It all mattered. And while you might technically be allowed to bathe next to a gladiator, you wouldn't dare speak to him unless you had a death wish or a very flattering compliment. And yet, encounters happened. Awkward, wonderful, mortifying encounters. Take the fictional case of Publius, a nervous baker's apprentice. First time in the Thermae, he stumbles into the wrong room and sits directly across from Maximus, a famed Thracian gladiator with biceps like amphorae. Publius tries to start a conversation, something casual, about bread. Maximus just stares. Publius starts sweating. Maximus starts oiling his chest. Publius drops his strigil. It clatters. Someone laughs. Publius does not return to the bathhouse for 3 weeks. And it wasn't all flexing. Some athletes took bathing very seriously. They had routines, systems, the right balance of hot and cold plunges, the right oil blend, the perfect amount of scraping. One story tells of an Olympic wrestler who oiled himself so thoroughly before a match that his opponent couldn't grab him. He slipped right out of holds like a greased eel. Was it legal? Probably not. Was it iconic? Absolutely. Let that image stay with you. A human bar of soap winning Olympic gold. Yes, wine. The elite sometimes brought refreshments to the baths. Nothing says casual wellness like sipping watered-down red while watching a naked discus thrower argue with a flute player. These moments, absurd, intimate, messy, were the lifeblood of the Roman experience. And no matter who you were, you walked out of the Thermae with the same oily glow, the same red skin, the same awkward towel tan lines. It was a unifying ritual, even if you entered at different doors. That's the paradox of Roman baths. On paper they were equalizing. In practice, still built on a scaffolding of hierarchy, celebrity, and social theatre. But in those slippery, overheated spaces, occasionally you saw humanity peek through the performance. So, next time you feel self-conscious at the gym, remember, someone once tried to impress a gladiator while oiling their calves with a stick of olive wax, and it probably worked. Because confidence, like oil, goes a long way. Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient politics. The real Senate was soaking wet. The real drama happened not in marble halls, but in steam-thick rooms where towels clung questionably and secrets floated like mist over a hot spring. Welcome to the sudatorium, the hot, sweaty gossip cauldron of the Roman Empire. Imagine it. You step into a room so foggy you can barely see your own betrayal coming. Your skin prickles. Your hair wilts. Someone coughs dramatically in the corner. A senator sits cross-legged on a marble bench, pouring water over hot stones, while quietly destroying someone's reputation in a tone just loud enough for nearby ears. This is not just relaxation. This is information warfare. Because the Roman bathhouse wasn't merely a place to unwind. It was a pressure cooker of opinion, rumour, and not so subtle character assassinations. If the forums were where policies were debated, the baths were where alliances were formed, enemies were slandered, and futures were boiled alive. Let's be clear. Gossip wasn't an embarrassing side effect. It was the point. Nobody came to the sudatorium to mind their own business. They came to soak in everyone else's, and no one gossiped harder than the elite. Senators, poets, generals. They all bathed here, and when their tongues weren't tripping over philosophy, they were slicing reputations like prosciutto. A noblewoman's scandalous affair? Discussed. A merchant's bankruptcy? Announced. A failed military campaign? Mocked to the rhythm of dripping condensation. And the acoustics? Perfect. Domed ceilings made whispers travel like chariots on a cobblestone street. A single well-placed rumour could spread across the empire in the time it took to oil your knees. Take the case of Gnaeus, a mid-level bureaucrat who made the mistake of bragging about a minor victory in tax reform while lounging near the general public. Within 2 hours he was accused of embezzlement, sleeping with a goat, probably metaphorical, and demoted to grain inventory in Britannia. His only crime, talking too loud near a guy who hated his sandals. That's how fast things moved. And it wasn't just words that made waves, it was the way you said them. A raised eyebrow, a pointed cough, a chuckle that lasted just a second too long. The bathhouse was a stage, and everyone had a role: the observer, the whisperer, the scoffer, and the conveniently placed statue pretending not to listen. Of course, the true masters of bathhouse subterfuge were the poets. Yes, the poets. You'd think they'd be scribbling quietly somewhere. But no, these were the sharp-tongued lyrical assassins of their day. A few witty verses overheard in the steam room could be the difference between immortal fame and public ridicule. Martial, the original roast comic of Rome, famously wrote couplets so biting they made enemies at the baths, and possibly in court. Some even claimed he composed new insults mid-bath, which frankly is an energy we should all aspire to. And let's not forget the spies. Yes, really. Informants, undercover messengers, even paid eavesdroppers, stationed at popular bathhouses. The thermae were the ideal spot to pick up intel, drunk on heat, relaxed by oil. People said things they shouldn't. Loose lips sink ships. Try loose towels ruin careers. There's even a story, probably exaggerated, definitely amazing, about a failed assassination attempt that started with a suspicious back massage. The target? A senator. The assassin? A masseur who carried a dagger instead of a strigil. The motive? Political. The result? A poorly timed sneeze, a missed opportunity, and one very awkward chase through the frigidarium. But it wasn't all cloak and dagger. Sometimes it was just raw, undignified social collapse. Picture this. Lucius, an up-and-coming poet, decides to recite a new verse in the tepidarium. It's about Neptune. He thinks it's brilliant. Half the room thinks it's trash. A philosopher corrects his grammar mid-line. A former mistress laughs too loudly. He flubs the final stanza, knocks over a water jug, and slips into a brazier. Next day, everyone knows. By dinner, it's a joke. By next week, it's a cautionary tale, whispered to other aspiring artists who dare bring their work into the hot room. Because, in the baths, failure wasn't private. It was steam amplified and marble echoed. But here's the twist. Despite the humiliation, people kept coming back. Because the bathhouse wasn't just where you got roasted. It was where you became real, where masks slipped, where status met sweat and everyone had spinach in their teeth. Metaphorically speaking, it was vulnerability. Weaponized, yes, but also shared. In this chaos of whisper networks and half-clothed shade-throwing, there was a strange intimacy, a recognition that everyone, from the slave to the senator, risked exposure. And maybe that was the point, to purge not just dirt, but secrets. To shed both skin and stories, to leave lighter, even if your ego came out bruised. So next time you think modern gossip is savage, tabloid headlines, subtweets, leaked DMs, remember, 2,000 years ago, a man's entire career could be torched because he misquoted Virgil near the wrong steam vent. And somewhere in the mist, a statue of Hercules is still laughing. So you're coughing. A little feverish. Maybe your joints ache. In our modern world, you'd go to a clinic, get poked with something sterile, and leave with antibiotics and a vague fear of your insurance deductible. In ancient Rome, you went to the baths, and if that didn't work, leeches. Medicine in the empire was a strange brew of sharp observation, bad guesses, and sheer confidence. And central to Roman health theory, apart from the endless draining of bodily fluids, was the belief that water, heat, and steam could fix pretty much anything. Enter the therma as a medical sanctuary. To the untrained eye, it just looked like naked men arguing and exfoliating with metal. But to Roman doctors, it was practically a healing temple. The heat opened pores, the steam purified, the oil, well, they thought it did something spiritual, or at least vaguely aromatic. And the leading voice in this moist revolution, Galen. Yes, that Galen, celebrity doctor to emperors, pioneer of humoral theory, and possibly the first man to suggest that feeling mildly damp might realign your spleen. Galen was the Beyoncé of Roman medicine, quoted, controversial and dangerously influential. He swore by hot steam, said it balanced your humours. That's blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, in case you were wondering, the four horsemen of ancient biology. If you were too hot, you had too much yellow bile. Too sad, definitely black bile. Did your leg hurt? You probably needed to steam out your excess phlegm. And if none of that helped, time for some leeches. But we'll get to those delightful little vampires in a minute. First, back to the baths. Doctors would often set up shop inside or near the bathhouses. They weren't white-coated professionals, but more like robe-wearing, opinionated freelancers. You'd show up, point to your aching shoulder, and they'd nod wisely while handing you a drink made from boiled herbs and sadness. Then they'd tell you to sweat more. Always more. Steam it out. Scrape it out. Bathe twice a day if needed, because clearly your humours were staging a coup, and it wasn't all nonsense. The baths did help a little. Warm water relieved joint pain. Steam loosened congestion. Cold plunges snapped you out of headaches, or at least distracted you with hypothermia. And for someone living in a world of lead pipes, rotten food, and zero allergy meds, the bathhouse may have genuinely been the healthiest part of your week. But it didn't stop there. Let's talk minor surgeries. At some baths you'd find the tonsor, a barber/surgeon hybrid, who would shave your beard, lance your boils, and maybe pull a tooth or two between manicures. Nothing says pampering like having your ingrown toenail removed next to a naked stranger getting an armpit massage. Sanitary? Absolutely not. Enter the leeches, used for bloodletting. These were the go-to tools when a Roman doctor decided your internal balance was off. Headache? Bleed it out. Rash? Bleed it out. Marital problems? Probably bleed it out. Leeches were stored in jars and slapped on flesh like living band-aids. They'd suck until full, drop off, and then ideally you'd feel better. Or woozy. Either worked. Picture this. You're sitting on a stone bench, olive-oiled and vulnerable, with a physician muttering about your phlegm levels. He applies 3 leeches to your lower back, while telling a bawdy joke about Jupiter's thighs. Meanwhile, a flute player is practicing next to the cold plunge. You begin to wonder if this is healing or performance art. And still, people believed. Because what else could they do? There were no antibiotics, no germ theory, no MRI scans, just sweat, steam, and superstition. And to their credit, some Roman doctors were careful observers. They tracked symptoms, took note, even performed dissections, mostly on pigs and the occasional unlucky criminal. But with limited tools and wild theories, medicine had to feel right, and the baths felt good. They felt powerful, communal, ritualistic. Every scrape of a strigil was a promise. You're doing something. You're taking control. Let's not forget the mineral waters. Some bathhouses were built over natural springs, believed to have magical properties. People travelled for miles to bathe in sulfuric sludge that stank like rotten eggs, but allegedly cured everything from arthritis to heartbreak. Entire towns were built around this stinky hope. You'd arrive with a limp and leave with optimism and a rash. And it wasn't just locals. Foreigners came too. Rich Gauls, nervous Greeks, even a few curious Egyptians. They'd line up, drop their tunics, and dive into the belief that this water held the key to something better. Because healing wasn't just about fixing. It was about faith. The belief that if you followed the steps, endured the rituals, submitted to the leeches and the lectures, you might walk out lighter, cleaner, less cursed. So the baths became more than baths. They were sanctuaries, hospitals, confessionals, places where your body and soul got steamed into submission, one session at a time. And the doctors? They did their best with what they had, which, to be fair, was mostly oil, hot rocks, and leeches with commitment issues. Let that image linger. A Roman man lying prone on a marble slab, 5 leeches clinging to his back, a doctor shouting about bile imbalances, and a half-eaten fig on the floor, all in the name of health. Honestly, could be worse. At least the coupe was a fruit basket. By now, you've probably constructed a romanticized mental image of Roman baths. The marble arches, the golden light, the noblemen reclining like Greek statues, but allow me to shatter that illusion like a dropped amphora full of communal oil. Because in reality, these places were chaos. Pure, unfiltered, wet-footed, echoing bedlam chaos. A sensory explosion where tranquility went to die. Let's start with the children. Yes, there were children, running, screaming, cannonballing into the plunge pool, slipping on tiles, getting into fights over whose sandal was stolen by whose cousin. The thermae may have been public baths, but they doubled as ancient daycares minus the supervision, and plus the possibility of drowning in a fountain shaped like Neptune. You try to relax in the tepidarium, eyes closed, channeling your inner stoic, when suddenly a child shrieked nearby, launching a sponge across the room like a catapulted marshmallow. Did it hit a magistrate? Probably. Did the magistrate pretend it was fine while secretly plotting generational revenge? Definitely. But let's not just blame the kids. Adults were equally chaotic. Vendors roamed the halls, selling everything from honeyed cakes to pickled fish. Imagine trying to meditate while someone hollers, "Figs! Fresh figs! Get your figs into your left ear," as your mid-scrape with a strigil. And if you were unlucky, a street performer would sneak in, a flute player or a juggler, hoping to win over the crowd with 2 tricks and 0 shame. And then, the rat. Yes, rats. Don't let the stone walls fool you. Beneath those elegant mosaic floors ran heating channels, storage crevices, and enough tunnels to host a rodent rave. They came for the crumbs, they stayed for the warmth, and they multiplied like, well, rat. You'd sit on a bench, feeling a tickle on your ankle, and glance down to see a whiskered snout disappearing into a crack in the marble. Do you scream? Do you move? Or do you pretend it's just part of the experience? Most chose denial. It was easier that way. Then there was the water itself. Let's be honest. It wasn't pristine. It wasn't filtered. And despite best efforts, it wasn't exactly changed hourly. Bathhouses often serviced hundreds, sometimes thousands of people in a single day. Sweat, oil, dirt, hair, flakes of skin, the occasional drunken sneeze. It all ended up in the same stew. By noon, the coldarium was less soothing and more simmering people soup. Still, people dove in, cheerfully, repeatedly. They'd spit into corners, blow their noses discreetly, even relieve themselves in spots they thought no one could see. And yes, you're right to feel ill, because it wasn't just poor hygiene, it was proudly bad habits backed by complete cultural confidence. And if you think the staff was on top of it, well, bless your optimism. There's even documentation, actual documentation of bodies being discovered in the heating chambers. Not metaphorical ones. Actual corpses. Whether from accidents, collapses, or something darker, no one's quite sure. But what's certain is that at least one bather sat comfortably on a warm bench, unaware he was being gently heated by the unintended sauna of human tragedy below. Sleep tight with that one. Because with so much communal lounging, clothing swapping and body oiling, lice had a field day. Combs were shared, towels were suspect. And once infested, you could pass it on faster than a juicy rumour in the sedatorium. So you'd sit in a room with 30 other half-naked Romans, wondering which one of them gave you that mysterious itch. Was it the juggler? The vendor? That child who wiped his face on your knee? But despite all this, the shrieking, the vermin, the water that smelled faintly like disappointment, the bathhouse thrived. Because the chaos wasn't a flaw, it was part of the ritual. There was beauty too. And in between it all, you sat there, skin slippery, senses overloaded, strangely content. Because somehow, Amid the noise and the vermin and the mildew, you felt connected, human. Part of the clamour, the city pulsed through those walls, and even if the water was questionably warm and contained more DNA than a crime scene, it was your water. So next time you light a candle, pour yourself a bubble bath, and think, just like the Romans, remember you're missing the rats, and the flute guy, and that one child peeing suspiciously close to the cold plunge. And honestly, that's probably for the best. Etiquette. It's what separates us from the animals. That, and the ability to invent unnecessarily complicated rules for standing in line, making eye contact, or, in the case of ancient Rome, sitting quietly in a hot room without triggering a full-scale social implosion. Because Roman baths? They were minefields of unspoken protocol. Cross the wrong line, enter the wrong door, wear the wrong footwear, and congratulations, you've just offended someone's entire lineage. Let's begin with the entrances. Many bathhouses had multiple doors, separate entrances for different classes, genders, or ticket levels. Accidentally wander through the wrong archway, and suddenly you're an ill-mannered peasant, pretending to be patrician, or worse, a man intruding into the women's hours. Instant scandal. One badly timed entrance and your name's being whispered in the tepidarium for weeks. And then there was the order of bathing. There was a sequence. You didn't just bounce between rooms like a caffeinated tourist. First, the palastra, then the tepidarium, next, the caldarium, then oiling, then scraping, then, only then, the frigidarium. Doing it out of order was like eating dessert first at a state banquet. Juvenile, disrespectful, and absolutely cause for judgment. But let's say you've navigated that correctly. You've entered through the appropriate door. You're following the sacred flow of the bathhouse. Now comes the seating. You think benches are just benches? No, friend. Seating was status. There were preferred spots, near the fountain, under the skylight, by the incense burner. If you dared sit where a known noble typically reclined, you risked either a direct confrontation or, more humiliatingly, a passive-aggressive clearing of the throat. The worst crime. Wearing sandals in the caldarium. The hot room was sacred space. Steam, silence, solemn sweat. Walking in with sandals, especially if they were noisy, was like bringing a vuvuzela to a funeral. The sharp slap of leather against marble echoed like a declaration of barbarism. One record even mentions a man being physically ejected for clacking too loudly while entering a discussion on Stoic ethics. There was also the matter of volume. Roman baths were lively, yes, but there were decibel limits. The caldarium required hushed tones. The sudatorium demanded whispers. Yelling was for the gymnasium. Laughter was tolerated, unless it was at someone's expense. Coughing too much? Suspicious. Might be disease. Too quiet? Also suspicious. Might be eavesdropping. But the ultimate sin, bringing your servant into the wrong room. Let us introduce Flavius. Flavius is fictional, but you know the type. Nouveau riche, recently inherited money. Believes buying imported cheese is a personality. Flavius walks into the bathhouse with his personal attendant. Nothing unusual there, but instead of having his man wait in the changing room, or stand discreetly by the oil table, Flavius has him enter the frigidarium, with a towel, and grate. In full view of everyone, gasps ripple through the room. The senator's wife drops her cup. Someone coughs dramatically. A philosopher shakes his head in visible disappointment. And worst of all, a known poet starts composing a satire on the spot. Flavius, oblivious, lounges in the cold pool, while his attendant fans him gently with a palm frond. By nightfall, the story has reached 3 villas, a military camp, and the corner bakery. By next week, Flavius is immortalized in verse. The grape-fed fool, a biting hexameter about hubris, humidity, and poor social judgment. He never returns. Because reputation in Rome was fragile. Especially in the baths. These weren't just social spaces. They were reputation crucibles, the place where the mighty could rise and the clumsy could fall. And small errors? Always noticed. Take towel placement. There were designated spots to hang your towel, using someone else's hook. Theft. Sitting on someone's folded linen. War crime. Accidentally mixing up your towel with another bather's. Prepare for a very tense, very public negotiation involving gesturing, sniffing, and the slow realization that no one is quite sure which towel is which anymore. Want more pitfalls? Oil hogging. Some bathhouses provided communal jars. Using too much oil? Selfish. Dipping your strigil into the communal jar? Unforgivable. You just contaminated the whole batch with your back sweat and ego. Then there were conversational landmines. Politics? Dangerous. Religion? Suicidal. Money? Tacky. You were safe with literature. Weather, or that funny thing that happened at the chariot races. Just don't name names. Or mention Varro's latest scandal, especially if Varro's cousin is in the steam room behind you. You were also expected to know a few flattering phrases, complimenting someone's physique, strigil technique, or philosophical take on bathing was standard. Failing to greet someone of higher status? Rude. Too enthusiastic a greeting? Desperate. It was a tightrope walk, all while mostly naked. Let that image sink in. You, clutching a towel, trying to remember whether to nod or bow to the praetor's nephew while avoiding eye contact with a disgruntled philosopher who thinks you stole his bench. But here's the irony. For a place meant to cleanse and restore, the Roman bathhouse demanded constant vigilance. Relaxation, yes, but only within the framework of rigid, unwritten rules enforced by passive aggression and bad poetry. It wasn't about comfort, it was about conformity, and if you succeeded, if you moved with the right rhythm, spoke with the right tone, scraped at the right angle, you disappeared into the steam, anonymous, and accepted. But if you slipped up, you became a cautionary tale, a whispered anecdote, a punchline wrapped in a towel. So next time you're at a spa and someone talks too loudly, remember, in Rome, they would have written a satire about them and maybe slipped a toad into their sandal. Because etiquette wasn't just politeness, it was survival. If you've been imagining the Roman bathhouse as a steamy, toga-clad co-ed cocktail party, allow us to interrupt your fantasy with a reality check, soaked in cultural expectations and wrapped tightly in gender politics. Because, for all their architectural genius and oil-slicked openness, the Romans had very particular ideas about who should be naked near whom, and when. In theory, men and women bathed separately. In practice, well, things got complicated. Let's start with the standard arrangement. Separate bathing hours. Most public bathhouses scheduled specific times for women and men. Women usually got the morning hours when the fires were barely burning, the steam was lukewarm at best, and the oil jars still had yesterday's funk clinging to the rim. It was like getting into a hot tub that's mostly ambition and disappointment. Men? They got the prime time. Afternoon to evening. Fully heated rooms. Fresh oil. More staff. Better snacks. Why? Because patriarchy, of course. And also because Roman society decided that a woman's leisure time should be efficient. In and out. No lounging, no philosophical discourse in the coldarium. Just wash, scrape, and disappear before the senators show up to complain about the economy. But sometimes, the gendered order broke down, and that's when things got spicy. Mixed bathing wasn't officially condoned, but it happened. Usually in private baths, or in the larger, more cosmopolitan cities, where the rules got as steamy as the sudatorium. And when it did, moralists lost their collective minds. Seneca the Younger, professional buzzkill and philosophical fun sponge, wrote extensively about the dangers of women bathing with men. He claimed it eroded virtue, undermined decency, led to affairs, divorces, and most offensively, loud laughter in the tepidarium. But Rome had always been a contradiction machine. The same society that outlawed mixed bathing also commissioned bathhouse mosaics of Venus reclining with strategically placed water jugs. The same empire that frowned on female public nudity also sold perfume oil, advertised with near-naked models on clay jars. So, what was it really like for women inside the thermae? Imagine a space both liberating and limiting, a room full of steam and expectations. You enter, escorted by a servant, carefully avoiding eye contact with the matron glaring at your sandals. You're here to wash, maybe to socialize, definitely to be watched. Not in a scandalous way, but in that quiet, judging, who does she think she is kind of way. You talk, you gossip, you complain about your husband's new mistress and her appalling fashion choices. You try not to slip. You definitely try not to be seen as trying to be seen. The atmosphere, thick with steam and tension. But then there were the rebels, the rule breakers, the women who didn't care. Take Empress Faustina, wife of Marcus Aurelius, frequently rumored to have bathed with men, in full public view, sparking every senator's worst nightmare, a woman who didn't fear the frigidarium. Historians can't agree on whether it was true or imperial slander. But either way, the effect was seismic. Mixed bathing became a political talking point. Some emperors banned it, others reinstated it. One even tried to enforce a clothing-optional compromise, which somehow made everything worse. And it wasn't just about decency, it was about power. Who got to linger? Who got to be heard? Who had time for a second oiling? And who had to rush home before the nursemaid quit? The answer was always layered. Class mattered, gender mattered, reputation mattered even more. Imagine being a freedwoman, recently elevated by marriage to a minor official. You visit the bathhouse alone. You choose the wrong seat. Someone whispers. By the time you reach the frigidarium, your entire social circle has decided you're scandalous. Why? Because you wore earrings. In the bath. Bold move. Now picture a high-status matron. Wealthy, educated, guarded by a small entourage. She enters the bathhouse not to cleanse, but to command. Every glance from her is a verdict. Every word, a headline. The staff hover. The other women shift. Even the statues seem to straighten. That's the paradox. The bathhouse could elevate you, or expose you, and yet, many women found freedom there. Freedom from corsets of expectation. From marble villas filled with silence. In the hot rooms, your body spoke louder than your lineage. For a few short moments, under the same steam that softened emperors and senators, you were just human. Sweating, scraping, soaking, equal, if only by proximity to hot water. And sometimes, there was laughter. Real, unfiltered, echoing laughter. Overheard in the caldarium when someone slipped. Or when someone told a joke about a philosopher and a fishmonger walking into a strigil vendor. Trust me, it killed back then. And yes, occasionally someone pushed the boundary too far. There's an apocryphal story of a merchant's daughter who entered the male side during an unspecified hour. She claimed it was an accident. The senators claimed it was treason. The poets claimed it was inspiration. What followed was a week of performative outrage. Odes to modesty and at least one satirical play performed entirely in towels. Whether the story's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is how baths reflected Rome itself. All its contradictions, its egos, its quiet little revolutions. Because bathing wasn't just about cleansing the body. It was about asserting identity. Gender wasn't just biology, it was performance. And the bathhouse was the stage. So next time you dim the lights and slide into your bubble bath, remember, in ancient Rome that simple act could have sparked debate, scandal, admiration, or a poem written in hexameter. Picture it. A quiet, dusky room. Incense curls through the air like a whispered memory. The water is still. No laughter, no arguments, no dripping strigils. Just silence. Not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. You're standing in a Roman bathhouse, but no one is sweating. No one is oiling up. The towels hang undisturbed, because this bath is for the dead. Yes, in Rome, people bathed after death, sometimes before burial. Sometimes symbolically, and sometimes with eerie serenity, actually inside structures built for both cleansing and grieving. You didn't think hygiene ended with a heartbeat, did you? In Roman tradition, the boundary between the living and the dead wasn't a hard stop. It was a fading ripple. Death required purification, rituals to scrub off the invisible grime of mortality. And what better place than the bathhouse, where Romans already shed skin, sweat and sin daily? Let's talk logistics. After death, bodies were often washed by family or professional pulling tours, those whose entire job was death prep. The corpse would be oiled, scraped, yes, even post-mortem, and sometimes wrapped in linen soaked with herbs. This wasn't just about presentation, it was about purity, spiritual hygiene. Making the body presentable to both the gods and the ancestors who, according to popular belief, were watching, always. In wealthier households, this washing might happen in a private bath chamber, but some tombs, actual mausoleums, featured mini thermae, small baths attached to the resting place, as if the deceased might rise up one day and want to freshen up before meeting Pluto. Let that image settle in your mind. a ghost reaching for a strigil, muttering about back pain and metaphysical humidity. And then there were the funerary feasts. Banquets held in honor of the dead. Family members would bathe beforehand, sometimes at the same facilities used by the deceased. It was all part of the ritual, physical purification before emotional release. Imagine grieving while soaking in a warm caldarium, your tears indistinguishable from steam. But it wasn't just ritual cleansing. Sometimes the bathhouse itself became the tomb. Let's meet Claudia. She was a real Roman woman. Her epitaph was discovered centuries later, etched lovingly by her husband. He described how, before her burial, Claudia bathed, how she lingered, how serene she looked, as if she were already letting go of the world. He had the bath preserved, turned into a shrine. Visitors were invited to sit where she last sat, to reflect, to remember. It's not dramatic to say her bath became a form of afterlife. That's the thing with Romans. They were sentimental in the strangest ways. Bathing wasn't just about the body, it was about identity, memory, emotion. It was the backdrop to love affairs, political plots, existential debates, and apparently, goodbye. And for the record, Roman tombs weren't always solemn crypts. Some were built, like villas, with courtyards, benches, mosaics, and yes, little bathing areas, because why not make death comfortable? You suffered through life, paid your taxes, endured poetry readings in the sudatorium, you earned a nice post-mortem soak. Of course, not everyone got the luxury. For the poor, bathing after death might involve a quick rinse in a communal basin. If that, others weren't washed at all, especially during plagues, wars, or mass executions. The unwashed dead were seen as dangerous, not just hygienically, but spiritually. Their ghosts, it was feared, might linger, unclean in life, unclean in death. And now, this fear fueled superstition. Some bathhouses reported hauntings. Yes, hauntings. Strange sounds at night, cold spots near the caldarium, murmured voices when no one was there. Rational minds blamed wind, rats, or creaky pipes. But the more poetic claimed they were, the spirits of the improperly bathed souls denied their final cleanse, now doomed to drift between hot rooms, forever damp and displeased. One tale tells of a young man who refused to wash his deceased father before burial. Days later, the bathhouse flooded, inexplicably. The oil jars shattered, and the strigils disappeared. They found them months later piled neatly in the frigidarium. Coincidence? Maybe, or a ghost with a flair for passive aggression. But here's what's truly beautiful, and a little heartbreaking. For all its grit and chaos, the Roman bathhouse could also be gentle. Still, reverent, in its best moments. It was a place of release, of letting go. And in the case of the dead, it offered dignity, a final chance to be seen, cleaned, honored. And the living? They used it to grieve, quietly, communally. Imagine sitting in a lukewarm pool, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, all mourning someone different. No loud sobs, just silence, a shared understanding that life is short, the water is warm, and time like steam disappears before you can hold it. That's the poetry of Roman death baths. Absurd and profound, ritualistic and raw. They remind us that even in antiquity, humans didn't just fear death. They tried to comfort it, wrap it in linen, oil it gently, lower it into the afterlife, with clean skin and a half-hearted joke about Mercury's sandals. So if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by modern grief, the paperwork, the flowers, the casseroles, remember that once, in another world, someone honored their loved one with a final bath. Not as a chore, but as a ceremony. And that in the end is a kind of love that doesn't die. Let's take a break from the theories, scandals, and ghost stories. Instead, let's follow two people, realish, entirely made up, but believable, through one ordinary day at the Roman baths. First, meet Marcus. He's a plebeian baker. Works 12 hours a day, sweating over dough, soot, and unreasonable customers demanding sesame crust. His back hurts. His hands are burned. But today he's treating himself to an afternoon at the Thermae, Rome's steamiest form of self-care. Then there's Decimus, a patrician, old money. Think inherited 3 vineyards and a Senate seat before puberty kind of energy. His biggest hardship today was deciding whether to wear the purple trimmed toga or the other purple trimmed toga. Spoiler, he brought both. Now, watch closely. 9 a.m. Marcus finishes sweeping ash from his bakery floor. He tells his apprentice to mind the bread and heads toward the baths, still smelling faintly of yeast and resignation. Meanwhile, Decimus rises late. He eats grapes in bed while a servant reads him the news. Something about a neighbor's nephew causing a ruckus at the forum. Mildly amusing. 10:15 a.m. Marcus pays his entrance fee, a single copper coin, and changes in the apoditerium. The room is loud, crowded, and smells like damp optimism. He stores his sandals in a cubbyhole and says a quick prayer that they'll still be there when he returns. At the same moment, Decimus is arriving through a private entrance. He doesn't carry coins. His account is settled monthly by a secretary he's never met. He nods to the attendant and hands off his toga like royalty shedding silk. No one breathes near his sandal hooks. 10:30 a.m. Marcus stretches in the palastra. He jogs once around the track, attempts a push-up, then pretends to stretch because his arms have declared mutiny. A wrestler next to him oils up aggressively, sending droplets flying. Marcus flinches. Politely, Decimus does not enter the gym. That would involve effort. Instead, he strolls to the tepidarium, where a slave fans him gently with a peacock feather. He discusses poetry with a retired general who misquotes Horace and refuses to admit it. 11 a.m. Marcus heads to the coldarium. He sits on a stone bench and immediately regrets it. It's hotter than Vulcan's forge. He scoots subtly. No one notices. Nearby, someone sneezes loudly and drops a strigil. The sound echoes like a cur. Decimus enters shortly after. The room hushes, or maybe it's just the steam swallowing the chatter. He reclines, has oil massaged into his shoulders, and muses about politics while being gently exfoliated by someone with perfect posture. 11:45 a.m. Marcus begins his scraping ritual. The oil on his arms smells faintly rancid, but it's better than what he can afford at home. He's using a shared strigil and pretending not to care. Next to him, two men argue over property taxes. He listens, fascinated, because he didn't know people could own that much land. Decimus has his own strigil, gold-plated, monogrammed. Probably never touched anyone else's armpits. His oil is infused with lavender and superiority. He tips his attendant with a wink and a line from Virgil, which the attendant pretends to appreciate. 12:15 p.m. Marcus plunges into the frigidarium. The cold hits like betrayal. He gasps, flails briefly, then composes himself. A child splashes nearby. Marcus pretends it didn't hit his face. It absolutely hit his face. Decimus lowers himself into the same pool, but not with Marcus. Of course not. There's a roped-off section, unofficial but understood. He's handed a cloth to dab his forehead and discuss Cicero with a man who owns 3 ships and no personality. 12:45 p.m. Marcus dries off with a scratchy towel and eats a small fig pastry he bought from a vendor outside. It's stale, but sweet. He sits on a bench and watches the crowd. A poet is loudly reciting something about nymphs. Marcus doesn't understand it, but he likes the rhythm. Decimus is escorted to a shaded atrium. He dines on olives, honey, and gossip. Someone brings up a recent scandal involving a governor's daughter and a mosaic artist. He chuckles politely while mentally filing it for future blackmail. 1:15 p.m. Marcus heads home, feeling lighter. His joints ache less. His mind feels uncluttered. Maybe he'll write a joke in charcoal on the bakery wall tomorrow. Something about slipping on oil and dignity. Decimus leaves through the private exit. A servant waits with sandals already warmed. He feels content, powerful, and faintly drowsy. He'll probably nap until dinner. Maybe write a speech he won't deliver. Same bathhouse, same rooms, same rituals, and yet entirely different experiences. Marcus sought relief. Decimus maintained prestige. One scraped to feel better, the other scraped to be seen. But both walked out glistening in their own way, trailing oil and identity through the Roman afternoon. That's the secret truth about the Thermae. They were mirrors. They reflected back what you brought in. Tension, pride, exhaustion, ambition. The baths didn't change who you were. They just softened the edges, made everything a little slipperier. So whether you were a baker or a patrician, you left with a sheen. Maybe temporary, may be illusion, but in that shimmer, for a fleeting moment, you were part of something bigger, a society, a performance, a ritual, older than you and steamier than you expected. The tiles are cracked, the fountains drip weakly, the scent of sweet oil has curdled into mildew and regret, and that flute player, gone, replaced by the sound of wind whistling through broken archways and pigeons who've claimed squatters' rights. Welcome to the end of the Roman bathhouse. Once the pride of the empire, gleaming, grand, overflowing with oil and arrogance. Now, the Thermae stand as hollow, moss-covered echoes of former glory. The decline wasn't sudden. It was a slow rot, like wine turning to vinegar. You might not notice it at first, until you find yourself scraping with a bent strigil and wondering if that water stain is just a stain, or something trying to grow teeth. So what happened? Let's start with the obvious. Money. Bathhouses weren't cheap. Heating the coldarium alone required forests worth of firewood. Add in attendance, oil, maintenance, mosaic upkeep, and the occasional marble statue commission. And suddenly, your daily dip costs more than a senator's bribe fund. As the Roman economy wobbled, funding dried up faster than a forgotten towel in the frigidarium. Fewer patrons, fewer repairs, more rat. Then came the invasions. Germanic tribes, Huns, Visigoths, all taking turns poking holes in the empire's infrastructure, like bored toddlers with a sharp stick. When Rome itself was sacked in 410 CE, the baths didn't just suffer damage, they suffered symbolic collapse. What good was a luxurious suddatorium when your villa had no roof and your neighbor was suddenly a warlord? But economics and invasions were just the beginning. Let's talk about the Christians. As the empire shifted from polytheism to Christianity, the very idea of the bathhouse became suspect. Communal nudity? Immoral. Idols carved into the walls? Heretical. Philosophical debates in the nude? Temptation incarnate. The bathhouse, once the epicenter of civic life, was now framed as a den of vanity, indulgence, and moral decay. Some bishops even referred to the Thermae as stew pots of sin, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. And so, one by one, they were abandoned. Some repurposed into churches, others stripped for building materials. Columns carried off to support cathedrals, marble repurposed for altars. A few became makeshift housing, with families living among once grand mosaics, cooking lentils beside cracked fountains. Domestic life, now surrounded by echoes of imperial sweat. It's a strange image, a child playing where emperors once soaked, rats running across a floor once reserved for senators, and a goat chewing something suspicious next to what used to be a public oil jar. You can almost smell the decay, the wet stone, the mold, the sadness of abandoned opulence. And still, the ruins remained beautiful. Even as nature crept in, vines cracking walls, moss climbing statues, rain pooling in the frigidarium, there was a kind of melancholic grace. You could stand in the center of a ruined tepidarium, look up at the broken dome, and feel the weight of 1,000 vanished conversations. But let's get more specific. The baths of Caracalla, one of the grandest ever built, began crumbling in the 6th century. Fires, earthquakes, and centuries of looting left it a skeleton of its former self. By the time medieval travelers passed through, it was already considered ancient, its grandeur visible only to those who squinted through time. And yet, pieces lived on. Sarcophagi were carved from bathhouse marble. Church floors were tiled with stolen mosaics. Even strigils, once used for bodily scraping, were repurposed as tools or melted down for coinage. The bathhouses didn't disappear, they were cannibalized, transformed, ghosts wearing the skin of empire. One chronicle from the 9th century describes peasants entering an abandoned bath to take shelter from a storm. They built a fire in the furnace room, unaware it once heated emperors. They hung meat from a statue's outstretched hand, and as lightning cracked above the broken dome, they huddled together, unaware they were living in the final, flickering memory of a vanished world. Poetic? Sure. Gross? Also yes. But decline is rarely clean. The fall of the Roman bathhouse wasn't a noble bow-out. It was messy, filthy, muddled with politics, religion, and the very human inability to let go of a good steam session. And yet, even in decay, people remembered. Stories were told. Myths passed on. Children were warned not to play too long near the haunted caldarium, where ghosts still sweated their sins away. Artists painted crumbling bathhouses as symbols of lost glory. And eventually the Renaissance rolled in, with architects rediscovering those same ruins and saying, hey, maybe they were onto something. Because even centuries later, the skeletons of the baths inspired awe. Michelangelo studied their arches, Palladio mimicked their proportions. Modern spas borrowed their layout. The bathhouse, long dead, still whispered through marble. But it's the small, quiet image that lingers most. Nothing says decline like livestock contemplating divinity. So here we are, at the end of a chapter. The baths are gone. The strigils rust. The oil jars sit empty. And yet, something remains. A feeling, a shape, a lesson. Maybe. That luxury fades. That community crumbles. But ritual endures, even in ruins. It's 2025. You're in a softly lit spa, ambient whale noises oozing from hidden speakers, eucalyptus steam wafting up your nose, and a complimentary cucumber water sweating quietly in your hand. You're about to enter a sauna, towel-clad, Bluetooth earbuds discreetly in place. Congratulations. You're doing what Romans did 2,000 years ago, just with better towels and fewer rats. Because the Roman thermae didn't disappear. They mutated, evolved, took on new names, new customs, new forms. The steam survived. So did the scrape. The rituals. Still here, only now. They come with waivers, hashtags, and reward points. The onsen. A volcanic hot spring bath. Communal soothing scalding in the best way. Shoes off, clothing forbidden. Etiquette strict. You wash before entering. You soak silently. And you leave emotionally restructured. Sound familiar? The layout could have been ripped from a Roman blueprint, minus the senators, plus the snow monkeys. But the energy? Uncannily Roman. Equal parts relaxation and quiet societal pressure, not to make weird noises. The water is sacred, and so is the silence, a modern temple of steam. Then there's Turkey. The hammam, direct descendant of the Roman bathhouse, carried forward by the Byzantines, perfected by the Ottomans. Still grand, still sweaty, still strangely intimate. If that's not Roman, what is? Now shift to Korea. The Jjimjilbang, 24-hour spas that double as sleepover clubs, snack bars, social hubs, and multi-temperature labyrinths of therapeutic weirdness. Hot rooms, cold rooms, salt rooms, jade rooms. You nap in pajamas, sip cold rice drinks, and get brutally massaged by a woman named Auntie Kim, who could crush a Roman centurion with her thumbs. It's bathing as event, as ritual, as shared absurdity. And again, the bones are Roman. The layout, the purpose, the awkward communal eye contact. All echoes. Even in the West, the tradition survives. In Scandinavia, sauna culture reigns. Sweltering wood rooms, icy plunges, and the unspoken law that no one should speak unless it's about weather or how nice the wood grain is this year. In Russia there's the banya, where bathers beat each other gently with branches for circulation they claim, before diving into ice holes and re-emerging reborn and slightly dazed. Modern gyms now offer steam rooms and saunas as amenities, as if sweating beside strangers under buzzing fluorescent lights is a luxurious bonus. And not a Roman cosplay gone horribly beige. Even your bathroom, your sacred candle-lit Spotify-curated escape, owes its architecture to Roman logic. The tiled floors, the heated towel rack, the multi-jet showerhead that blasts you like a Mediterranean hurricane. It's all rooted in the same philosophy. Cleanse, comfort, control. Of course, we've added our own twist. Today, bathing is branded. It's self-care, aesthetic, Instagrammable. There's an entire economy dedicated to making you feel that bathing is not just good, but productive. You're not just relaxing, you're detoxing, rewiring your nervous system, rebalancing your pH, aligning your chakras, and doing inner child healing with Himalayan salt. But let's be honest, at its core, it's the same thing it always was. A ritual of being human, of pausing, stripping away the noise, the dust, the digital grime, of standing in hot mist and saying, yes, I am overwhelmed, and no, I don't know what to do about it. But at least I'm clean. Even the awkwardness is familiar. That guy who talks too loudly in the steam room. The one doing deep breathing exercises that sound suspiciously like summoning a demon. He existed in Rome. His name was probably Gaius, and he once passed out mid-sentence while describing a dream he had about Jupiter and a really big fish. The woman who brings a loofah the size of a possum and scrubs like she's removing her memories. Also Roman. Different century, same energy. And let's not forget the flirtation. You think your gym's co-ed sauna is awkward? Imagine the Frigidarium, year 1307 AD, when someone's towel accidentally slips and suddenly a philosopher and a fishmonger are engaged in a staring contest that may or may not lead to a legal dispute. What's remarkable isn't that bathing evolved, it's that it persisted through empire collapse, through plague, through bad plumbing and worse morality laws, through the rise of soap and fall of modesty, through modernity and minimalism and the tragic invention of scented bath bombs that make your tub look like a unicorn died in it. The core idea of this act of shedding layers, of entering a space to transform, stay, because we need it. We crave spaces where we can be soft, vulnerable, silly, quiet, cleanish, places that aren't work, aren't home, aren't judgment, just rooms with heat and silence, and maybe one guy humming a little too loudly. We may no longer scrape ourselves with bronze knives, or soak beside a philosopher arguing with a gladiator about tax policy. But the spirit lingers, in every steam-filled room, in every awkward shuffle in a towel, in every deep exhale as you sink into water and feel the weight lift. Just a little. So next time you sit in a modern spa, wrapped in terry cloth, sipping cucumber-infused serenity, remember, you're reenacting history. You're bathing like an emperor, or at least like an olive-oiled baker with a dream. So, you've made it this far. You've visualized the steam, the scraping, the scandalous eye contact. You've followed the journey from empire to exfoliation. And now it's time for the question no one asked, but you definitely need answered. Would you, a modern, reasonably civilized human being, survive even one afternoon in a Roman communal bath? Let's begin with the obvious. You think you're adaptable. You drink oat milk. You once went camping with friends and didn't cry until nightfall. You've tried hot yoga. You've been in a sauna. You've even dipped into a cold plunge once, screamed internally, and told Instagram it was invigorating. No, but the Thermae, that's not a spa day. That's a full-contact sensory ambush. First you'd walk in, hopeful, open-minded, and be immediately confronted with the smell. Not just oil and sweat. No, the Roman bath had layers. Damp stone, burning wood, citrus peels, questionable feet, and something else, something unidentifiable, like wet marble had feelings, and they were all negative. You'd fake a smile. It's historic, you'd whisper, already regretting your life choices. Then you'd undress, and here is where the psychological unraveling begins. Romans did not have body shame in the way modern people do. You're clutching your towel like it's a legal right. You've already counted 6 moles you'd forgotten about. Meanwhile, next to you, a retired soldier named Tiberius is doing stretches that require far more flexibility than should be visible to the public. You try to pretend you're fine. You're not. Then comes the tepidarium. Lukewarm. Fine. Manageable. Hey, you think, I could actually enjoy this. And for 5 glorious minutes you do, until someone sits way too close and begins a conversation about the ethics of gladiator salaries. You nod, you sweat, you regret studying Latin in college. Now the caldarium, the hot room. Your skin begins to complain. Then scream. You sit down and immediately stand up because the bench is roughly the temperature of volcanic glass. Your face melts. Your dignity withers. You try not to cry, but the tears come anyway, and they evaporate before hitting your cheeks. Someone offers you oil. You accept because you're polite, and begin rubbing it on your arms. It smells like a Mediterranean fever dream. Now what? The strigil, a curved blade. A man motions for you to begin scraping. You stare at it, like it's a medieval torture device. It kind of is. You try scraping. It's not elegant. It's not gentle. It's you, in a steamy marble room, dragging a piece of metal down your leg while a teenager watches and giggles. Somewhere in the corner, someone farts. Loudly, no one reacts. You try to remember your happy place. It has doors and soap. Then someone tries to chat. They ask where you're from. You say Brooklyn. They mishear Britannia. You now have to explain that no, you're not a barbarian. Yes, you pay taxes, and no, you have never met Emperor Hadrian. The conversation spirals. A nearby philosopher offers unsolicited advice about your posture. You stand. You bow. You leave. Frigidarium time. Cold plunge. Your final test. You lower yourself in slowly, cautiously, like a house cat testing a puddle. Someone cannonballs next to you. You scream. Internally, of course. Outwardly, you just yelp and inhale water. A tooth may have chipped. You'll never know. The cold takes over. Your muscles seize. Your lungs forget how to function. You float for a moment in what can only be described as ancient disappointment. A man compliments your stoic resilience. You nod. You think it was sarcasm, or maybe a flirtation. Either way, it's too much. You drag yourself out, towel off with something resembling a tablecloth, and collapse onto a stone bench next to a goat. Where did the goat come from? No one knows. The goat does not care, neither do you. And yet, despite the humiliation, the heat stroke, the sensory violation, you feel something alive, raw, dehydrated. Yes, possibly scarred. But there's a strange sense of having endured. You didn't thrive, but you survived. Barely. And maybe, just maybe, you understand something the Romans did. That beneath the chaos, the discomfort, the constant scraping, there was meaning, ritual, a kind of vulnerable communion, a recognition that everyone at some point needs to sit in a hot room and be reminded that we're all just weird, sweaty mammals trying to make it through the day. Would you go back? Absolutely not. Would you talk about it for the rest of your life? Endlessly, because that's what the Thermae did best. They didn't pamper. They humbled. They took emperors, farmers, poets, and now you and dunk them into humanity's steamiest metaphor for survival. So no, you wouldn't last a day. But surviving an hour? That's still impressive. Close your eyes. No, not literally, I mean metaphorically, because you'll want to see this. You're walking through a narrow marble hallway. Your bare feet slap gently against the damp floor. The air is warm, not hot, not cold, just right. Somewhere far ahead, you hear the low hiss of steam escaping from a vent, like the world is quietly exhaling. Now step into the room. It's the Caldarium. But not like before. No shouting, no scraping, no lectures on Stoic philosophy. Just warmth. Just stillness. The light filters in through a small round window in the ceiling, and it dances across the mist like golden thread on a tapestry. You lie down on a stone bench. It's been warmed for hours. It cradles you, surprisingly gentle for something carved by hand 1,000 years ago. You exhale. You didn't even know you were holding your breath. There are people here, but no one talks. They shift occasionally, water dripping from their fingertips, their breath rising in lazy spirals. A woman hums. Soft. Wordless. Familiar. It echoes gently, like it was meant to find you. You close your eyes for real this time. Your mind begins to wander. You think of the lives that passed through this room. The senators, the slaves, the poets, the petty criminals pretending to be philosophers, the lovers who met eyes through mist, the enemies who pretended to be friends, the strangers who shared silence. This steam has absorbed centuries. It knows things, and if you listen closely, it tells stories. Here's one. A boy, 15, maybe, sneaks into the bathhouse. He's not supposed to be here yet. His father said next year, but he's tired of waiting. So he slips past the guards, strips quickly, and hides in the tepidarium. He listens, watches, learns. No one notices. Or maybe they do, and let him stay. He grows up that day, not because of what he does, but what he witnesses. A kindness exchanged between rivals. A joke that diffuses tension. A moment of reflection in a pool of still water. Later, he becomes a magistrate. A fair one. And he always keeps his baths open late, just in case someone else is watching, learning, growing. Or another. A woman, veiled, enters quietly. Her husband died last week. A soldier, gone in the Eastern Campaign. Everyone tells her to stay home, to grieve in shadows. But she comes here instead, to the only place she ever felt weightless. She walks to the frigidarium, dips one toe in, and lets the cold remind her that she's still alive. No one stares, no one speaks, but someone leaves a clean towel by her bench. When she leaves, her steps are steadier. Let that sink in. These spaces weren't just about dirt and oil. They were about memory, emotion, pause, even peace. The baths were loud, chaotic, absurd. Yes, but they were also sanctuaries, places where time slowed, where breath mattered, where the noise of Rome dimmed for a moment, and you could hear your own heartbeat, and maybe someone else's too. Now, back to you. You shift on the bench. You're warm, but not sweaty. Your thoughts begin to stretch out, uncoil, like lazy cats in the sun. You don't need to think about the calendar, or your inbox, or whether your neighbor left their trash out again. You're here. Inhale. The air smells like old stone and faint citrus, like someone cleaned centuries ago, and the scent never fully left. Exhale. The sound of water trickling nearby, a soft splash, then silence again. No one needs anything from you right now, not even yourself. Outside these walls, empires rise and fall, markets collapse, politics combust, but in here, the bath holds. In here, the only schedule is your breath. The only currency is calm. And it's strange, isn't it, that a place once filled with naked gossip, public bickering, and philosophical arguments somehow also birthed moments of such quiet humanity, that somewhere between the scraping and the soaking, people found something close to serenity. You feel that now. The layers falling away, not just physical, mental too. The to-do list gone. The social performance dissolved. The anxiety slipping off your skin like old oil. And maybe that's the real gift of the therme. Not the hygiene, not the exfoliation, not the chance to casually eavesdrop on a senator discussing embezzlement, but the whisper that says, "You're allowed to be here, just as you are." That whisper floats through the steam now, wraps around your shoulders, rests lightly on your chest. It hums in time with the air. It says you're enough. You're here. You're okay. So stay a little longer. Let the warmth settle into your bones. Let the silence wrap around you like a second towel. Let the centuries-old steam smooth the edges of your modern-day mess. And when you finally stand, dry off, and walk back through that marble hallway, you'll carry something with you. A whisper. A stillness. A tiny invisible mosaic you now wear inside. Not a souvenir. A reminder. So here we are at the end of the bath. The steam has cleared. The strigil's gone cold. And you, weary traveller, through time and mildew, have seen things. Not empire-toppling things. Not sword-swinging, history book cover things, but the quiet stuff. The everyday moments that never made it into marble inscriptions. Because here's the truth. Boring history is the best kind. Wait, hear me out. Sure, gladiators are exciting. Colosseums, emperors, wars, betrayals, all fantastic. But they're loud. Spectacular. They burn fast and bright and disappear just as quickly. But bathhouses? They linger. They tell you how people lived, what they touched, where they sighed, how they washed off the day's disappointments. This is the history of shared benches and awkward eye contact, of toe fungus and overheard gossip, of the kind of human mess that doesn't get carved into triumphal arches. And that's why it matters, because anyone can conquer Gaul, but only Rome made a public facility where senators, butchers, poets, and pickpockets all sat in the same room, slowly steaming themselves like confused dumplings. Only Rome institutionalized awkward nudity as civic infrastructure. These were places without script, without performance. Well, okay, there was a lot of performance. You had to walk correctly, scrape correctly, avoid slipping on mosaics shaped like dolphins. But still, bathhouses offered something profoundly democratic. Not in politics, in present. No rank survives the frigidarium. No title protects you from the sting of cold water up your nose. No ego remains intact after a stranger offers to scrape your back. Boring? Sure, but honest. And let's not forget, boring history builds the world. We live in the structures boring people maintained. We drink from aqueducts laid by nameless hands. We use baths. Still, we scrub. Still, we seek quiet, warm rooms and soothing rituals, not because it's novel, but because it's necessary. This history sticks because it worked. It's in the way we design spas, the way we crave silence, the way we instinctively hush in steam rooms. The Roman bathhouse lives in your skincare routine, in your tile choices, in your longing to feel clean, not just on the surface, but somewhere deeper, soul deep. And maybe that's the legacy worth remembering. Not emperors, not conquests, but Claudia, who used to visit the baths every Thursday, sit in the same spot, and hum softly as she scraped her skin, who left behind no statue, no inscription, just a lingering tune in the mist. Or Marcus the baker, who never once skipped a bath after work, who always tipped the oil boy an extra coin, who died at 73 with smooth elbows and no regrets. Or the nameless hundreds who passed through arches, clutched towels, nodded to strangers and left behind nothing but steam. We remember them here, in boring history, in footnotes and strigils, in bathhouse drains clogged with stories no one ever wrote down. And maybe that's why it's so perfect for sleep, because boring history is patient. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't explode. It seeps in, slow as condensation, gentle as lather, a warm, awkward, human story whispered in the steam, forgotten in the records, and somehow more enduring than 1,000 triumphs. Let that sink in. The heartbeat of a civilization isn't its conquests. It's its routines, its rituals, its Tuesday afternoons. And when we visit that, when we truly see it, we don't just learn about the past. We feel seen by it. So yeah, boring history. The kind where no one dies but someone farts, and no one says anything. The kind where the room is silent, the air is thick, and for 5 minutes, no one is emperor or slave, just human. That's the good stuff. That's the kind that matters. And that's why we came here, why you listened, why you stayed. To remember that history isn't always about what changed the world. Sometimes, it's about what kept it warm. Still awake? Wow, you might have just broken a Roman endurance record. If you loved this slow descent into bathwater and oblivion, subscribe for more sleepy sarcasm, historical chaos, and ancient echoes. Until next time, rest well, and maybe skip the Caldarium.